Well, let's move on to the next one here. That's only a tiny decimal point different, 18.3 now. What is this one all about?
Well, 18.3 involves tacking in a zone. The result that your tack has to the right-of-way boat, uh, any part of your boat, when you've tacked, ends up in the zone, 18.3 turns on. 18 Rule 18 in particular does not apply to any boats that are on opposite tacks until one of them tacks in the zone. And in this case, once you complete a tack in the zone, if the boat is fetching, which is important because they have to be making the mark when you do this, uh, typically you end up to leeward of them, but not always. You have to not make them sail above a close hauled course, or you have to give them room if the tack is above them.
So this, for me, this is classic. The guy comes in, he tacks around, and then, he finishes the tack and says, "Oh, I'm good." The finish attack, the two boats are in these two situations, these two positions. And the guy to leeward says, "I'm good." And then he says, "Now I just have to make the mark." And he shoots up and goes around the mark. But if that trailing boat has to, as this one does, the green boat has to go up above close hauled just to avoid as they shoot the mark right there, then that inside gray boat has fouled, is what you're saying.
Correct. And that's the gist of Rule 18.3. Interestingly enough, it no longer applies to any marks that need to be rounded to starboard, only marks to port.
Yeah. So if you were coming in from this direction and the starboard boat came and tacked in front of the port boat, you could then shoot up and go around the mark if you needed to.
Yes, as long as uh, you were entitled to mark room, which you
Right.
would be if you were overlapped inside.
Right. Well, and this three boat length area, always contentious and always arguable. So going back to your last point of certainty thing, you want to make sure that it's very clear that you're inside. If you're going to be using the zone for a purpose, and if you want to make sure, as this boat that's tacking right here, you're a lot safer if you finish your tack 4 or 5 boat lengths away from the mark. Then you can sail in and shoot up and go around the mark if you need to. So just think about those things on the race course, right?
That's smart sailing, and bear in mind that the 3 boat length zone is 3 hull lengths of the first boat to enter the zone. So if you're a big boat and a little boat gets there ahead of you, the zone is a lot smaller, and vice versa if you're a smaller boat.
Yep, good info, lots to think about. All right, we'll move on to the next slide. This one is an interesting one that we really need to hear from you on. What is this? Why is this rule important to us, and what's the major part of it that we need to pay attention to?
Well, there is a change in mark room regarding overlaps, and 3 boats are overlapped. The windward boat's on the inside. There is a change that I'm going to look for the rule and read it exactly to you, hopefully without boring you too much. The outside boat shall give the inside boat mark room unless Rule 18.2b applies, which typically does if they've entered the zone overlap.
Okay, so what are we looking at here? Just this top drawing. What's important for each boat to understand here?
Well, the black boat in the drawing, which is the ultimate inside boat, has to be given room not only by the green boat, but also the gray boat, which entered the zone more shy. And instead of coming up to her proper course, she has to stay more on a reach while the 2 inside boats come up on the wind as they round the mark. And this applies right where you have your pencil there. This applies until this inside boat, the transom of this inside boat exits being overlapped with the mark, so somewhere in this range, like you've drawn it. Right now they're on the leeward side of the mark, so the mark room still applies. And occasionally, if their proper course, for example, if the next mark is in this direction rather than dead upwind, it will apply typically until they leave the zone, because right now they're on their proper course.
Wow, okay, so what you're saying is if this is the course to the next mark, and that's the direction this guy's going, this middle boat, for instance, can't luff or do anything, sail any higher angle until they're outside.
Correct.
Okay,
Now,
that's good to know. So, and if the buoy is upwind somewhere up in here, then he only has to be done rounding the mark, so his transom is clear. Is that right?
right, right. Now his proper course also could be on either tack, but that's addressed more carefully in the match race rules and calls. In fleet racing, generally speaking, your proper course is to get to the next mark as fast as you can in the absence of any of the other boats.
Well, I tell you the thing that I run into all the time is as the boat that's, sometimes this is coming in here, but certainly if you're giving room to that boat, so often this boat doesn't appreciate that once you've turned, as soon as you clear this mark, you are now a windward leeward boat, and the boat to leeward can left you, unless, as you say, you're already on your course to the next mark, which might be out here somewhere. But if you're going upwind, there's a fair amount of risk here for that inside boat. You get your room, and then you have to stay clear of these outside boats. And I see a lot of situations where the inside boat takes the room, and then they don't appreciate that they also have to stay farther away from those leeward boats as they go around.
Right, and the mark room includes the room to sail your course in a seaman-like manner. So generally speaking, mark room is a sliding scale of varies depending on the sea conditions and how windy it is, as you're well aware.
Sure. Well, okay, so that's a slight change that we all, probably appreciate, just making sure that it's clear when you have exited the mark or not. What about this bottom one? What's going on with that picture?
Well, actually, Rule 18 does not apply here because the boats are on a close-hauled course and they are on opposite tacks. Interestingly enough, the only Rule 18 that will apply is when they're all on the same tack, or if one of them tacks in the zone, then Rule 18 applies, but only if they're rounding the mark to port, which is sort of an anomaly from what we were used to in fleet racing. It used to apply whether you're rounding to port or starboard. So that's something to consider. And surely, unless you've read the rules carefully, you never even thought about that.
Okay, so slowly just tell me the basics of that one again.
Okay. This actually depicts a situation of Rule 19 rather than 18, because when the boats are on opposite tacks close-hauled, Rule 19 will apply because the right-of-way boat, which is the black boat, is on starboard, and the other boats are on port, and they're keep clear boats.
Okay, so who's at risk here? This is probably this middle boat has the most responsibility of something they have to plan for, right?
Well, as you know, two things are going to happen tactically. The green boat may hail for room to tack if he doesn't think he's making it inside and in front. So he's now depending on the gray boat tacking to allow him to tack and get on to starboard. This scenario usually happens when the black boat is a little bit overstood. They're not shy on the mark.
Right.
The other thing is if there's a stack of starboard tackers coming and you're going to an upwind mark, then the green boat will duck. But when he ducks, he is required to allow room for the gray boat to follow and duck. And,
Right.
and a lot of skippers will hail for room to duck. There's no obligation in the rules to do that, but there's certainly an obligation to give room if you choose to duck.
So if I'm this boat right here, the green boat in the middle, it's my choice whether I go behind or ask for room to tack, correct?
Precisely.
And
Yes.
if I go behind the other boat, I have to make sure I leave room for the overlapped boat to windward of me to go there as well. And
Correct.
if I ask for room to tack, then this inside boat just here has got to respond in one of two ways. They either tack right away, and then I'm responsible to do the same, or they tell me for me to tack, and then They just stay clear however they need to make that work, right?
Correct. And if they choose to ignore you and not respond, they've then broken Rule 20 because there's an obligation to respond. However, you have an obligation to hail more than once. The rule, I believe, says repeatedly.
Well, and I would recommend to everybody that they carefully read those rules about asking for room to tack, because there are some requirements and some responsibilities, and you know, it can go bad. And again, we're going to have some great slides here shortly to